Zamera's perspective.
Life, we had long ago thought, was cooperative by nature. From the days of the earliest bacteria, the abundance of energy and room for growth on the planet Tessir resulted in biological codependencies between species. Evolution was guided not by cruel, ruthless competition for the largest slice of nature's bounty, but instead for its efficient distribution between all species. Only a few million years after the first identifiable life, larger protobacteria evolved radiation-resistant walls to protect smaller ones from the dangerous solar flares of our binary star system, and in exchange, the other cells would provide them with energy. This paradigm would come to be taught in classes as the pinnacle of evolution, a perfect example of how life adapts to benefit the life around it, and in doing so, reaps benefits from all other life forms. When the first multicellular organisms arose, they quickly followed this paradigm by growing energy-rich fruit for the bacteria around them, motivating the bacteria to defend their newfound friend. Indeed, this camaraderie predated sentience itself. Over time, life became more effective at sharing and distributing resources. On exceptionally rare occasions, some life would break this great paradigm and seek to prey upon the rest, be it by infecting them and giving nothing in return, or by devouring them for sustenance. This, too, however, was a necessary stepping stone in evolution, for without an aggressor to defend against, life would not have needed to cooperate further than it already did. Predation, therefore, was necessary to strengthen the bonds of life. It is in fact partly due to this continued, though exceptionally uncommon, niche that our own species first arose. When the primordial gardens first came under attack by an uptick of uncooperative creatures, a new niche entirely was created, specifically that of the Grand Steward, the Iragon. Our species adapted to fulfill this niche. We became smarter so as to better tend the gardens and to ensure the growth of all life around us. Eventually, the uncooperative species either unfortunately went extinct or were reintegrated back into evolution's glorious ideal of perfect unity. Our species, however, was different. We cared not only to maintain the balance, but due to our gift of sapience, we sought to expand it. For millennia, we roamed the planet, growing as a people and making discoveries that we shared with each other unreservedly. That is not to say, however, that we were perfect. In times of great shortages and suffering, wars broke out between nations seeking to claim what was necessary. However, no sooner did the lands once again bear fruit than did the friendship between tribes do the same. Over time, different nations arose throughout the lands. Their forms of governance varied, yet to every method there was merit. Never was it questioned that all deserved rights and dignity. Instead, the question was how best to give it to them. Centuries passed as nations waxed and waned and shifted and changed. For our species, there was no wrong political or economic system. Our dictators were usually every bit as benevolent and beloved as our elected leaders, and so when the time came for our planet to throw aside our old banners and unify, our decision to instate a planetary democracy was made solely because, though less efficient, it allowed for every voice to be heard. Dictators and royals alike volunteered to step down and retire their power, as was only natural. Our civilization was perfect, save for one small detail. We, as a species, were lonely. We longed to share the experience of sapience with others like us, to learn from them, and to build friendships. The first discovery of a planet orbiting another star was met by the Iragon community with rapturous excitement. Perhaps, we reasoned, our dreams of discovering others needed not remain dreams. Using the solar harnessing sphere built around our smaller sun, our brightest minds constructed a miracle of technology, the wormhole generator. With it, we could explore other solar systems with relative ease and hopefully find our brethren we sought. Life on other planets, we assumed, had to have evolved similarly to that on our own. Cooperation was clearly the most logical route for evolution to take. Evolution, however, is not a logical process. When we first discovered a formerly life-bearing world, we had assumed that it was sterilized by a meteor impact. However, closer inspection revealed a truth far darker. The populace of this planet had looked upon the miracle of nuclear fusion and asked themselves not what they could create with it, but rather what they could destroy. Surely, we thought, this was a fluke. And so we continued our search. Year after year, we explored other solar systems in search of a planet bearing sapient life, yet all we found were 1,000 dead worlds. Many were destroyed in nuclear exchange, some faced a slower death by planetary warming. It was all we could do not to weep for the friends we would never meet. Over the decades, we began to fear that the search was hopeless. However, almost as disturbing as the dead civilizations dotting the planets we discovered were the living creatures left behind. We had always assumed life was cooperative because why wouldn't it be? Nowadays, it is regarded as the greatest scientific misconception in history. Our planet was not the rule, but rather the sole exception. Life, as it turned out, was far more conducive to competition than cooperation. This discovery, however, was not enough to discourage us. Surely, we thought, sapient creatures had to be cooperative. Surely there could be no other way. Again, perhaps we were overly optimistic. The day we came upon the Druk homeworld was a time of great celebration. Finally, we had found the kin we sought. No longer would we be alone in the galaxy, forced to sit by ourselves at the great banquet table of existence. Immediately, we sent our finest envoys and most extravagant gifts to greet this new species. Much to our delight, they welcomed us. Surely, we thought, this species was going to be different. This would be the beginning of our galactic union, a hypothetical conglomerate of civilizations dedicated to bettering themselves and exploring the galaxy together. However, as we toured and analyzed their planet, it quickly became obvious that the Druk had a terrible problem. Their reliance on fossil fuels for energy was slowly but surely killing the planet on which they resided. Back when our species had first discovered the negative effects of this power source, we quickly pivoted to cleaner energy. Perhaps, we reasoned, the Druk hadn't done the same because they simply didn't know. Naturally, upon our startling discovery of the planet's trajectory, ending with civilizational collapse in under a century, we set out to warn the Druk and help them avoid this fate. Sending down our best and brightest to meet with their governing bodies, we sought to explain to them the dangers of planetary warming and to offer up our finest fusion and antimatter technologies. When they asked what our motive was for doing such a thing, we were perplexed. Did they truly think that we Irigan required a motive to save them? Nevertheless, insisting upon our selfless motives, we continued to offer our assistance. We were prepared to do anything for our new galactic neighbors. At first, the Druk citizenry were enchanted by our technology. We offered them hundreds of years of advancement on a silver platter. The Druk oil magnates, however, were deeply displeased. Immediately following our offer, their internet was flooded with falsehoods regarding our true intent. Propaganda, funded by those who profited from the deadly industry. They claimed we were plotting to take over, that we wanted to make them dependent upon us. They lied about the dangers of fossil fuels, downplaying and debunking them using horrid facsimiles of science and strenuous ties to religious prophecy. It was around this time that a new word entered our species' vocabulary. That word was avarice. Desperately, we fought to disprove these falsehoods, but to no avail. Eventually, the nations of the Druk made us a counteroffer. Either we would leave them and never return, or they would declare war upon us and our imperialist ways. We were stuck. We could not in good conscience leave an entire species to die, nor did we wish to take lives. Eventually, the council voted to continue our efforts at diplomacy. Once again, our best and brightest envoys were sent to negotiate. However, on their way to the embassy, they were shot down. Apparently, since our first meeting, the Druk had been using the technology we shared freely to, in secret, built a fleet that could defend against us. However, while perfectly suitable for attacking unarmed diplomacy vessels, their 70 ships were nothing when pitted against our relatively minuscule fleet of only a dozen vessels. Desperate to save the Druk from themselves, we effortlessly batted aside their attack force, and in order to prevent them from continuing their self-destruction, we made the hard choice to bomb their oil fields. Nearly 80,000 were caught in the blast, more casualties than any war the Irigan had ever known. We did not lose a single pilot in that fight, but many of our pilots lost themselves. The knowledge of how many they had killed drove many to end their own lives shortly thereafter, crashing into the planet's surface or offering themselves up to the locals for justice. The druk people, convinced by their lying leaders of our destructive intent, pleaded with us not to destroy them, something we held no intention of doing in the first place. They only asked that we leave them alone. Feeling guilty for our actions and hoping beyond hope to one day be forgiven, we gave them the technology we had offered and disappeared into the void. I wish I could say that was the end of our history with the druk, but unfortunately they had other plans. For 2 generations, they raised their children to fear and revile us for our unwarranted aggression, and rapidly their government became an oppressive military oligarchy ruled by the children of the very oil magnates who had slandered us. With their newfound power, the druk began anew their war against the Iragon, who had sought only to help them. 5 planets, their combined population over 10 billion, were wiped out by this impending force, one which used our antimatter generators to create bombs that would kill our own kind. On that day, we learned another new word: genocide. This, we found, was the nature of alien life, destructive and unpredictable. Of course, even with their militarized economy and impressive fleet, the druk could not stand against us for long. Though we only had 1 ship construction plant in our empire, it was fully automated and in mere days could produce a fleet of 1,000. When our ships once again hovered over the druk homeworld and we were prompted to show mercy, it was decided that we could not risk it. Despite the tragedy of being forced to destroy the only other living civilization we had encountered, nevertheless, we held on to our optimism that perhaps the next ones would be different, and in a way, they were. When we encountered the mayos, they had only just launched their first satellite. It was almost cute how much they celebrated this achievement. Their civilization, upon a cursory glance, seemed perfect, unified, democratic, and seemingly excited by the prospect of life beyond their home. Again, however, it was when we visited that the illusion came undone. When we first asked them who the ones dressed in rags working their fields were, the translator said that they were workers. As a result, we initially assumed that they were working of their own free will and compensated thusly. We did not have a word for slave. Our species had never even considered something so abominable. When we first discovered that 1/3 of their population lived in chains, it was reported that our diplomat passed out. Surely, we reasoned, they wouldn't do such an awful thing if they did not have to. Such an atrocity could be borne only from the most extreme of hardships. Naturally, if we would only offer them sufficient automation technology to perform the same tasks, they would take it without issue and free their own kind from this awful practice. They said no. Apparently, such a horrible practice was not only acceptable to them, but indeed part of their culture. Again, we were called imperialist for trying to stop it. Again, we were lied about and portrayed as conquerors without reason. Our mission to rescue the enslaved mayos was simple. We could fly in, gather as many as we could up, and escape. The mayos military could not face us on the ground, and surely they were not so callous as to bomb their own people just so we could not free them. Once again, we were wrong. The mayos had apparently decided that to defend their practice of slavery, they would go so far as to use a nuclear warhead upon us. However, no such weapon had ever been detonated by them before. Nobody knew that their planet's atmosphere would ignite along with it. Again and again the cycle repeated itself. Though the second act would almost always vary, our methods and the circumstances changing from case to case, the first and third acts seldom did. It always began with us finding new prospective friends with whom to share the galaxy, and ended with their self-destructive tendencies getting the better of them. For each species we failed, our civilization would hold a day of mourning, wherein we honored their memory with statues set up within the Hall of Hubris, a testament to our foolish idealism that we could somehow override the cruel mechanisms of their evolution. Most of these species had wiped themselves out before we could ever meet them, a deeply saddening concept for someone like me. Each statue held with it a plaque espousing the species' finest moments and imploring the public to keep within their minds the memory of these poor souls. Above the building's entrance was a simple plaque bearing the inscription of our empire's motto: "Not one more, I whispered to myself, fighting back tears as I pondered just what could have been had we discovered the truth earlier. In the end, the simple fact of the matter was that other sapients simply weren't fit for self-rule. Within our empire, over 100 species strong, this was the great truth to which we now subscribed ourselves. Now, whenever we encountered a new species, they would be given but two choices: surrender and accept the rule of those naturally more suited to ruling, or cling to the old ways and die along with them. For we could not risk a repeat of the Drook's bloodlust. "Miss Zimera." The sound of my assistant's voice piercing through the deadly silence quickly returned me to the present, where standing at the hall's entrance was a small young woman of the Sinal race. Their home planet, Ulmara, had borne witness to one of our empire's later, more refined forays into conquest. Upon their refusal to be ruled, we abducted a sufficient breeding population from amongst the dissenters and disposed of the rest. "What is it, Akali?" I sighed, unable to fathom what could possibly be so important as to usurp one of my brief daily morning sessions. "The monument on my people's home planet has been disturbed," she continued, her tone increasingly one of infectious excitement. "Just a few minutes ago, it broadcasted the FTL signal. That means that we have new friends to meet," I concluded for her, wasting nary another moment prostrating myself before the dead as excitement flooded into my mind upon the prospect. "Thank you for informing me, Ekali." And with that, I set off toward the FTL receiver. Whoever these aliens were, soon enough they would live amongst us in paradise. They didn't have a choice.